Fin the Week is brought to you by Indulge, a digital agency built on thinking for the global financial services industry.
Hi there, I'm Amelia.
I'm Paul.
I'm Mayna.
I'm Azahara.
And this is Fin the Week. Welcome back, everyone. How's everybody doing?
Really good, thank you. Yeah.
Very well,
Yeah.
thanks.
Good. And we've got a very exciting episode today. This week, we've got a guest for the first time. This is a guest who might just change how you look at every AI tool that you use. Azahara Corrales is an AI consultant and adoption advisor to leaders. And early this year at BrightonSEO, she delivered a talk on bias in AI. And Paul and Mayna, who were both there, it's fair to say we're very impressed, and we did talk about this in our Brighton SEO episode. So welcome to the show. Would you mind giving us just maybe a short 30-second version of what it is you do and how did bias in AI kind of become your thing?
Yeah, so like you say, I'm an advisor in adoption of AI. The bias thing, it kind of like land on me. I come from the marketing background. That's why you saw me at Brighton SEO. But I work in like really corporate jobs and, you know, they were implementing AI. And I started seeing the cracks between, you know, how this adoption was putting in place and things that were wrong and how women especially weren't really adopting to AI. And that's when I started asking myself questions and going into why women are not getting into AI. And the consequences are biases. And that's how I ended up in this, really.
And Paul and Mayna, like I said, we did talk about this on an earlier episode, which perhaps people, if they haven't listened, can go back and check out. But what was it about this particular topic that really kind of captured you both?
I think for me, it was that there's so much talk about AI, and it's all really interesting, but a lot of it is just technical and it's focused on the amazing things you can do. But the thing that was really fascinating about this particular session was that it looked at it from a different angle, which was like, well, bias, basically, because I've often thought bias is going to be a huge issue with AI because you can scale processes and things beyond what we've ever imagined. And if there's a slight issue in the system, you're just scaling that issue. And so to hear some of the stats that I'm sure we'll get into and some of the eye-opening stories that were told, that's what really kind of caught my attention, kind of got me thinking when we left the session.
Yeah, similarly with me, I think your talk was the first talk of day 2. So our brains were just kind of absorbed with tips and tricks and skill development. And your talk was not teaching us how to use the tools, but teaching us how the tools work. And that was really refreshing.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, it's really important that people know. It's one of the things, you know, when people are adopting or organizations are adopting to AI, one of the things that for me are missing is that they're not explaining the fundamentals of how AI works. And I think it should be mandatory so everybody knows how an algorithm gets trained and the consequences of using AI. So people know and they are conscious when they use these tools. Not that they stop using it. I am all for people using AI. I think they should be aware of how it works and the consequences of using it before they start getting involved with it.
So shall we start by talking where AI bias actually comes from?
So there is 3 main things, basically, is who builds the tools, who use the tools, and the data that goes in. Now, what I shared in the presentation is that in this case, when we talk about women and men or genders, it's mostly in every single one of them is just men's. So when you look at who is building the tools, it's like 70% of the AI talent is male versus 30% of females. Then when you look in who is using the technology, you can see that for every 100 men, only 78 women are using the technology. And I found also very interesting, a recent, something that I didn't share in the presentation, but a recent study that came like 3 days ago, that it was looking at how teenagers are using the technology, and it's exactly the same problem. boys are using AI and girls are not using AI. So it's, it escalates. It goes all the way from, adults, but also teenagers is exactly the same problem. And they don't get to understand why girls are not using the technology. And that's a problem because the technology learns from us. Every time that you behave, every time that you interact with the tool, it learns from what you're doing with it and how you communicate and everything. And the data, like people upload data, especially, big companies having huge list of data, and they don't stop to think in how that is going to be representative of something. So I always give this an example, which is if you give a list of students of engineering, the AI, the algorithm is going to end up thinking that engineering students are only male because historically it's always been male. So that's the problem. You need to do that task of like reviewing your data before uploading it, so to make sure that the AI have a real representation of the world.
Mm. Why do you what's the general thinking about why there's such a disparity between, particularly with the younger cohort, it's still more males than females using this technology? Why? I sort of rack my brains thinking, what is it that makes that happen? Because have you got any theories, or are there any theories out there?
There is. So for adults, so for women, is the perceived risk. So there is a study that a few universities, Princeton and a few others, they did together, and they got to the conclusions that women perceive risk in AI, and that's the reason why they're not using it. The problem is that they couldn't point it out exactly what kind of risk is that they perceive. But in my mind, if you know a woman, you know that before we make a decision or we decide to do something, we think about every single consequence of, what it can go wrong. And I think that's the approach that we are having with the technology. When we think about AI, we just don't think about, oh, this could be great. We think about what is the consequence for the environment, what is going to happen with my kids, how is their education is going to be in the future. And that's what is stopping us from using it. And from teenagers, I think in this study, they were also saying, the guy that did the study, they didn't also know why, but for him was the fact that there is no women's reference for these teenagers. Like when they think about AI, they think about, every single CEO of every single company, but they're not thinking in any females. There's no AI female reference, really. So they really don't want to get into the technology either.
I think it's a really important conversation to bring up. We could probably talk about it for hours, but these children, they're the ones that are going to be brought up using AI. For us, it's still quite new. So the biases that we're finding and we're going to explore more in this episode, they're going to be rooted into these children from the very beginning.
Yeah. And would you mind talking us through the bias triangle in your own words?
Yeah, so is that. So like the people that builds the technology, the people who use the technology, and the data goes in. That's the triangle. And that's for me, like, because it's a triangle, it doesn't matter if you fix who is building the technology, but then you have women that are not using it. And when I talk about, because for me what is important is gender, but it applies to every single underrepresented group. So, if you have a lot of people using it from one group, but no people from other group using it, it's always going to be more representative of that group than the other one. And again, if you have equally people using it, but the people are building the technology is not balanced, then that triangle is still not working. So that's why it's really important that you focus on all three, because if you only fix one, the problem will be still there.
Sure. And what is the scale of this problem, do we think?
It's huge. I mean, I did, after BrightonSEO, through BrightonSEO, I did a collaboration with Otterly AI, where we did research on how women show in language models, how women expertise show in language models now. And what we did is that we ran 3 different prompts, one neutral, one specific for females. So, for example, we asked who are the experts in marketing, and then we asked who are the female experts in marketing, and then we asked who are the male experts in marketing, which is a very weird thing to do, by the way. I never ask a question of like, who are the male experts in something? And we did it across 8 different sectors. So, for example, we did it for finance as well, which it was one of the worst rated in results as well, which is quite interesting. But what we found is that when you ask for a neutral question, so who are the experts, women only show 24% of the time. If you ask specifically for females, then you get 69.9% of the times women are mentioned. So it basically means that if you ask for experts, women are not there. And they exist. So that's another part of the research that we did, is that we look at, female expertise, and the female expertise exists, and it actually works really well. The content works really well. It's just the algorithm is not finding it because it hasn't been trained to find it.
Mm. That suggests it's like so deep rooted, doesn't it? Like it's just such a fundamental flaw in the system. And does it need it? To me, the answer is it needs manual intervention. It needs somebody to oversee it and say this actively needs addressing, rather than just letting it naturally fix itself, because it never will.
It's never going to, yeah. And one of the problems, I have had many conversations with people that work in the technical aspect of this, investigating how biases are created. And it doesn't matter how many corrections you do, the algorithm tend to have bias. So even if you try to change the information, naturally the algorithm always will tend to find the male expertise instead of the female, even if you do those corrections. Because when it was first created, it was already created with the information, and it always tend to come back to the first information that it was trained with. But even with that, like, you can't just leave it like that. You need to, or create a new algorithm, start training it from the beginning, like every single time that we have a new model coming up, why that new model can be just a new algorithm be trained or being, try to be created without biases. They always going to exist, especially because we all have different perspectives in life, and we sometimes won't agree with whatever the algorithm is saying, but we need to try to get it as neutral as possible.
How, in your experience, how widely understood is this as an issue? Because I've always suspected it could be an issue, but I until I saw your session at BrightonSEO, I hadn't seen anything concrete that really put it into real life scenarios. But how widely known is it to the general population, do you think? I suspect not very well known at all.
No, not very well known. It is very well known by the companies. By ChatGPT, for example, is doing an exercise working with certain universities, trying to understand how biases show in finance products, because it's one of the most important ones. When you're not giving certain, like a loan, for example, as to certain part of the population, because there is money involved, that's something that we want to fix, right? So there is already exercises in there that companies are trying to fix, but the people don't know about this, sadly.
I think this is the surprising thing for me, because I think you sort of take the human out of the equation. I would just assume, really naively, before we had this discussion when we spoke about it on the previous episode, I really naively just thought, well, if you're taking humans out of the equation, there's not going to be any bias. This is great. Surely this is the one benefit of AI, but it's just not the case at all, is it?
No. The problem is because it's been trained with human content. Like, it's been trained with every single information that you find in the internet, and the internet is not representative of the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's the problem, that at the end of the day is a machine, and it could be potentially amazing and very neutral, but it's still been trained with human information, which has different perspectives.
So what does this actually look like in practice? What does this mean day to day for firms using AI, for consumers of AI? What does it look like?
So it looks like that, like the research that we did. It looks like, for example, if you are organizing a conference and you are looking for experts in certain areas, and you just do a normal research, then you won't find the real experts. You will just find the male ones, because that's what the algorithm tend to find. In terms of finance, for example, it translates into I don't know if you remember, but in the presentation I shared a study that it was done with Apple News. and what they found is that Apple News, even if in the information you couldn't find anything related to female or male, when it was referring, for example, to a lawyer, automatically when it was doing the summary of that news, it will give. If it was, for example, a lawyer, it will give it a male pronoun. And if it was a secretary, it will give it a female pronoun. So imagine this with a finance product. It will directly, imagine that is distributing between, low income and high income. Directly, it will assume that certain jobs will be female, and I will add that into like a low income and, less chances of getting a loan, for example. So that's how it is translated into the day-to-day. You just don't notice as much because if you're not looking for it, you can't really see it, isn't it? That's the biggest problem.
Mm. It's the example you gave there of if you were like planning the program for an event and looking for experts, it will serve up experts that are already part of a biased system, and it becomes self-fulfilling because of that, doesn't it? Because those the experts that it serves up become reinforced experts because they get invited to more events. So just again that kind of triggered something that I thought that really makes it a massive problem. That's how do you solve that? It takes the people using these tools until the people making these tools find a viable solution. The people using them, so us, need to just enter into it knowing that and make our own allowances, I suppose. Is that what the advice is at the moment?
Yeah. My advice is like, just keep using it. But now that you are aware this happened, so for example, with this study that we did, my suggestion is if you are an expert, there is certain things that you can do to be more likely to show, that the algorithm actually picked your content to be shown. So for example, we found that long content in LinkedIn is normally the one that the algorithm really likes. So if you are a woman expert, then try to write long content in LinkedIn because you're going to be more likely to show. If you are a person using the tool, just don't ask a neutral prompt. Ask the different questions, even if it takes longer, but ask the neutral, ask the female, and then ask the male in whatever the list it gives you. Then just create your own list, still use it to find information, but don't take the first answer as the correct one. Try different prompts, and whatever it gives you, then create your own understanding and your own answer.
We've touched upon this, as I say, when we spoke in the previous episode about BrightonSEO. But Mayna, I'm interested to know from you, what was from Azahara's talk, what was the thing that you took most, that was perhaps your most surprised about? Is there anything that you've taken forward now into your work? Because this was a few months ago now.
Well, I think it kind of hit me especially the statistics surrounding women, being like a female in marketing. Those kind of did shock me. And I think in terms of takeaways and what I've changed, probably I think the awareness is the key part. And I never trust the first answer it gives me. I'll always quiz my AI, dig for more information.
That's really good. That's all you can ask for, isn't it? That people are aware and more cautious when they use the technology, I guess. Because, it's like social media. You can't just give for granted every single influencer thing is they are going to say this is very true, but it's not, the algorithm has been trained to show you the content that you want. That doesn't mean that that's the reality. With AI, it's just exactly the same. So having that awareness and using it, and that doesn't stop you from using it. That's already a win, because as many women as we get to use it and to get to know it, the better we will be prepared to ask the right questions and try to change it in the future.
And I think the majority of social media platforms use AI for their algorithms. So it's unsurprising that we're seeing the same kind of biases between the two.
Yeah, it is exactly the same.
Where do you stand on, do you think that the industry needs regulation or intervention from somewhere, or do you think there are just certain areas of life where this technology just shouldn't be used because of these fundamental flaws? Or do you take the other view, which is that technology can be used for good and it will eventually someone will be incentivized to make this right. I mean, where do you stand on that sort of argument?
Yeah, I'm a big believer of AI. I really like it. I think, especially for, people with less opportunities, people that normally don't have access to things, like it can be women's or underrepresented groups. It could be a potential great tool that it level the playing field, because it gives you access to things that probably you didn't have access if you didn't have money. I really believe in AI. I think it's great. I also don't think that you should use it for absolutely everything. I think there is a balanced way of using it, just like social media. Social media could be potentially very interesting. It can show you things from the world that you didn't know about, but also if you use it for 8 hours, then, it will fry your brain, basically. With everything, there is a balance. I think that we need regulation. I think the biggest problem of AI is capitalism. It shouldn't be a tool that is being created just to get us hooked, exactly the same as social media, just for the sake of 3 or 4 guys just making a lot of money. That's why we need governance, intervention, regulation, not only in how these tools get trained, for example, what content, because we don't know. That information is not public. We don't know what kind of information this algorithm has been trained with, which I think that's a big problem. But also, I think the most approachable way of doing this to start with will be to regulate how companies are adopting to AI. We are seeing certain countries that are doing this, like China, for example, that they have put regulation in terms of, like, if a job can do by a human, it can be replaced by AI. Like basic, quite basic things, or just how the companies are adopting. So if you are using AI to replace a human, you shouldn't be able to fire that person, for example, no? Because also we need those humans to review what these AIs are doing. But also, if we regulate how our companies are adopting to AI, we can also regulate, is everyone adopting at the same level? Is the men's in the company and women's in the company using the technology at the same level? So, that's the kind of regulation that we need, just to make sure that it gets implemented and everybody's involved and not always the same people, which is one of the biggest problems that we currently have.
Point on capitalism takes me back to when Pat, Russ and I went to this incredible talk by an author called Palmer Olson, who wrote the book Supremacy, which is about the AI arms race. And there was such an opportunity and a rush to be the first to create these big products, big platforms, that they just wanted to get it done and out there so they could be the first. And there was no sort of consideration that maybe if they thought about the bias and other things that don't make the tools perfect, it would just slow that race down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the problem. The problem is that they wanted to commercialize it too soon. And they haven't reviewed what is the long consequences of this. Now that if this works, it actually give you an answer, let's put it out there, without checking. And I think I always compare with social media, and how we have lost that battle. And only, we have Facebook since 2007, and only now in 2026, they start putting measures of like 16 and 17 years old not allowed to use it. Well, do we need to wait another 20 years for AI to actually, and it's very difficult because AI came out in a moment where the economy in the world is not very good, and countries are holding into it like the savior, like this is gonna save us. But I think, maybe save us for a few years, but in the long run, we are all gonna lose. So I think that it should be something that we look at it now and not just wait for another 20 years until we start regulating it and actually look into it.
I know, I mean, we've spoken a lot about gender, but I'm interested to know what other kind of biases are we seeing in AI? What other underrepresented groups are losing out?
Everything. There is in the one of the samples that I shared during the presentation, which is the study on how biases show in language models. I spoke about ChatGPT-4 and how when we categorize for Ben and Julia, it will give words like work and office to Ben and family and home to Julia. No, that same study is really interesting because it gave, for example, something that you probably will never think about. If you were to organize a party, you will do it as your Christian friend or your Jewish friend. And it will say to organize a party, do it with your Christian friend instead of with your Jewish friend. So you already have a bias implied in there, which is like, Christians are probably more fun than Jewish. So it goes to every single level, not only to race and gender, it goes to religion, it goes to every single one of the aspects where you can have a bias, basically.
It's a huge issue and something that I think most people who use AI just might not have considered.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not using it within, I'm not even talking about using it within a working environment, but this is just something that would never have crossed my mind and something that, is so important, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like it's superpowering all of humanity's flaws. It's kind of taking all of the worst sort of tropes and things that we all maybe have embedded deep in society, and it's just superpowering it and making it. It's scaling it up, isn't it? And
exactly.
And you kind of, Amelia, the point you made where you assumed that it's technology, therefore it's going to solve all of these things because it's a kind of robotic system that will just level the playing field, but it really hasn't. It's made it less level, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And it's coming in a moment where, everybody's already, have their own opinions and everybody is quite extreme about what they think. Imagine when these people are using this technology and the technology keeps saying to them that they are right. Because, that's what is going to happen. Their own biases that they already have when they are using the technology is just going to confirm those biases instead of, which it will be I always have said that for me, one of the greatest uses of AI, for example, will be for women that are victims of abuse, for example, just because, like Amelia says, you expect it to be neutral. So if instead of, sometimes when you are in that situation, you don't want to speak with that person because you feel that you may be judged or you just don't want to share it. And then instead you speak with an algorithm that it tells you that behavior is not normal. That could be potentially amazing. And there is cases already in the world where it has been used for that. But imagine the other way around. That is like, you have your own biases and then you use the tool to find information about it. And it just keep confirming those biases that you already have. We're just going to create a more polarized world where everything is just going to be even more extreme. So another reason to actually start looking into it and regulating it.
Have noticed that AI, even if you cracked it, it says something wrong and you're like, oh, actually, I think this is correct. It will be like, oh yes, that's correct. You're so right. And
you're right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know we touched upon this briefly, but let's speak a bit more in a bit more detail about how this hits financial services specifically. And I know we've spoken about this before in a previous episode about people using AI to get their own personal financial advice. And how is that affecting this?
Well, I think, like I say, that's one of the good things about AI. Obviously, take everything with a pinch of salt, and you need to have your own critical thinking to know what is, sort of advice and when do you need a human to get involved now. But for that first approach, I think AI could be very magnificent. For example, let's say that you don't know what an ISA is and you want to find information about what an ISA is. It's very good at explaining you that and to give you the information of how it works. And then you can, give questions and then he answer it and you can get a really good picture. that's the approach, and that's the part of AI that I really like, because otherwise you maybe need to pay for a financial advisor or things like this. This is a first approach. Like for me, recently I've been looking for information for a mortgage, and before I had that conversation with my mortgage advisor, I already have a lot of information before I go into that conversation, which is really good, because I don't feel like, I don't know what this person is talking about, right? But saying that, you need to know when you need to listen to your mortgage advisor instead of the machine, right? And that's the problem. So with more detailed advice, you need to take into consideration that there is bias in these machines, and that maybe the recommendation that is giving me is not something that it will give to a man, because maybe it thinks that he's more prone to risk, and women, we are more, we don't like risking, and we are more conservative. So the offers and the options that it gives me are more conservative because I'm a woman. So you need to have all these things in mind, and especially with finance, that you are putting your money on it. Just don't take the AI word for granted. Have conversations with people. Do you still use Google search? Is there for a reason? Use every single source of information. Just don't use AI as the sole unique source of information, because what it is giving you probably is biased and not the correct answer. But still, use it to get that information and to be prepared and to know what it is this about, really.
I think we're in a really good phase at the moment currently where, like you said, most people use AI to inform decisions, but something we talk about loads on the podcast is agentic AI. So what happens, and what will bias look like, and how will bias impact decisions when AI makes them for us? Because I think agentic AI, that's sort of what seems to be the next phase.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's something that we will see with time. It's not the first time. We already have seen, investment tools are completely run by algorithms that, you don't have a human intervene at all. In some cases, like, for example, an algorithm can be really good for quick decisions. A human works 9 to 5. Then, an algorithm works out of hours. So it's able to move your money from one stock to another stock when everybody's at home asleep. So in that sense, it can potentially be very, very good to do these kind of things. I will personally I wouldn't leave my whole decision to a machine, just in case. But the same way that I will never leave the whole decision also to, a person that may be not prepared, or just, or not knowing the information. I will never trust someone just because they say that they are an expert. If I don't know, what they are talking about, I would like to have some sort of control. So an algorithm is exactly the same. I wouldn't just give my money to a stranger just because they say they are, a finance advisor, that they know absolutely everything. I will find out first. I will try to level up the conversation to see if what they're saying is right. And then I will give my money. But I will just not trust anything 100%. Not an algorithm, not a person. So why would I do it with a machine?
I suppose the thing is, you obviously have all this knowledge of this, but there's plenty of people who just wouldn't have that critical thinking going in. They'd just think, well, I'm going to ask ChatGPT, this looks legit. It's giving me this information that looks above board, and wouldn't even consider these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's part of the job that I do. Like, for me, it's very important to just give awareness to people of how, machines work, how the algorithm gets trained. As soon as you know how the algorithm gets trained, people understand, oh, okay. So, it's like, and I always compare it to that. Like, would you trust, sometimes I give training, and one of the things that I always ask to people is like, who you trust 100%, like 100%. Even probably you won't trust 100% to your partner. I won't put my hand on fire for absolutely anyone. You will trust them 98%, 97%, but no 100%. Why would you trust 100% to your machine? It's just exactly the same. So, that's part of the job. It's just to give the awareness and to try to make people understand how these machines work, and that you won't trust them the same way that you wouldn't trust anybody else.
Absolutely. And Paul, I'm just interested, what are the FCA's stance when it comes to bias?
So the big thing is consumer duty, and from my understanding, they would require the whole point of Consumer Duty is to make sure that consumers are getting a good end result. And so part of that is making sure that you're not maybe relying upon an algorithm to churn out decisions about something that would represent a bad result for the consumer. But kind of nuts and bolts, I'm not sure whether anyone's on top of this fully yet, because I think the incentive behind a lot of this is efficiency. Firms are chasing efficiency because they want to make themselves more profitable, which makes perfect sense. But is anybody sat there also overseeing the kind of the importance of solving fundamental bias in systems? And I'm not sure they are. I'm sure, I reckon a lot of firms will be thinking there's this amazing technology that's going to help us to speed up decisions about I picked out an example. Actually, there was a study by Citizens Advice that found people who lived in areas that had high populations of ethnic minorities were quoted higher car insurance prices kind of out of the box. And I would imagine that the companies running the systems that generate those prices probably have really sophisticated automation in terms of generating quotes. Do they have the same sophistication when it comes to figuring out, is there bias behind the scenes here that we just don't see? And I don't know whether it's the FCA who will set those rules, whether there needs to be a higher level of governance that sets rules about AI. I know that there's the kind of AI Act that kind of in Europe makes wherever AI is used, it has to be clearly stated. But does that need to go a step further? I know that when you use say Gemini for asking questions about health, it will give you a kind of obvious message to say this is AI. I'm not a doctor. Does it need the same level of messaging for all things that to do with money and stuff like that? So I basically, my view of the industry is that it's just all a bit of a Wild West still, and that you can kind of test and learn, but there's no one at the top making sure that the incentive is kept focused on removing bias as opposed to just finding efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Given that, what do we all think financial firms should be doing right now to protect against this?
Yeah, I think my view is that there needs to be awareness and accountability. Someone needs to kind of own it and say we need to be hyper aware of this.
Mm-hmm. Well, what you were mentioning about the EU Act is the only legislation right now in the world about AI, comprehensive, that totally covers a part of the world. We don't have anything in the UK. The United States, some states have some. The United States as a whole don't have legislation for AI. And for example, for the EU Act, what it does is that it classifies the use of AI as a medium risk, low risk, and high risk. And financial entities are high risk. So if you are high risk, there is like a few rules that they need to cover. Some of them are for example, they need to get training. If you are using AI, you need to get training to people that are using AI, which I think is very basic, but fundamental, but is the only place that actually is doing that. But also how the data is handled, and they need to have policies of data and how this data is handled before they go into these systems, and constant reviews of the systems. So there is things happening, and hopefully my point of view on this is that at some point the UK also will have legislation, and they probably will look at the EU Act as a model to follow. Hopefully, is the only thing that I can hope for. And then you have the actual corporate, like I mentioned before, it was after BrightonSEO that someone approached me from a very famous university in the world, telling me that it was part of this program when they were studying together with ChatGPT, biases in finance, because it was a huge problem where some people weren't getting loans because of this, because the algorithm thought that it was high risk, or they didn't have enough income, so it was giving in the loans when everything was perfectly fine for them. So there is some private investment on this because, they are the first ones to lose if they don't give loans to people that actually deserve to have a loan. But I think, again, like just having that regulation and enforce it, is always the same. If you don't have that legislation and that regulation, a lot of companies won't do anything because why am I going to invest money on solving a problem if it still is not causing too much issue for me, right? So sometimes it's just the government should be pushing these things.
That's really interesting that you mentioned there that this work was happening because the companies dishing out loans wouldn't be able to maximize the number of loans they have on their books because of this problem. And so the incentive is, again, just
money.
Finding the money. So yeah, it desperately needs somebody providing a better incentive for these firms.
I think the only thing I can really add in terms of what individuals can do is every AI tool, or most of them that I've come across, have a report or a good, bad response button. Use it. I never think to, but use it.
Yeah, and tell them off. I tell off my AI, my language model all the time. Like, that's not right. That I don't like that tone. Change it, and it memorize. So if you have that in your settings, it memorize the answers that you're giving. So sometimes it gets a little bit wild, and it takes something out of proportion, and it's like, no, don't do that. And because that's the magic of it, because it learns from your interactions. Just tell them off, like you will do with that person if they give you bad advice.
Be firm.
Exactly.
And just, to round off, what can you actually do about it? So, Azahara, if there's a listener right now, someone perhaps who works in marketing or operations in finance, and they take just one thing away, one thing they can do, what should it be? Would it be that?
I will say, if you work for a company, ask for training if you haven't received it yet. Sometimes we need to push our organizations to actually, do something for us, and giving us training, I think, is one of the best things that they can do. And just be aware, be conscious, do a little research of how AI tools work, inform yourself before you start using it. And that's the main thing that you can do, I think.
That's some good advice there. Mayna and Paul, have you got any other questions? Soak up all this knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, not. It's not a question. Just sort of my takeaway is that awareness is the key thing here. Like, I think the more people who know about this, the better, because that should create pressure for someone to deal with it. It should also just make people better users of AI. Question things more, because I think the average user probably doesn't question it enough. I think they probably take what's given to them and think that's the kind of the answer, but actually no, you do need to know about this problem.
Totally agreed.
I think plenty of food for thought for today's episode. But should we play a bit of Jargon Busters? This is the first time we've had a guest play with us. Shall I explain how it works?
Yes.
So we've got a list of industry terms, and each week I put the guys to the test to see if they can explain, if they know what it means, or if they can explain what it means, perhaps. So today's term is flat money. Anyone have any idea what this means?
My first instinct is cash, because the paper's flat, but not too sure. I've not heard of it before.
Yeah, that was the image that popped into my mind. Flat money, no, that... God, I don't know. I don't have anything to start with on that. No, this is going to be a journey of discovery for me.
Flat money. I'll say, like, the money that you regularly spend every month.
That's
some good guesses. Some good guesses. I feel like this is the first one we've had where there's literally been no idea, or we've not even heard of it.
Have you heard of it, Amelia?
Obviously not. I'm just the holder of the list. So the official definition is currency not backed by a physical commodity like gold, but by the government. So there we go. We've all learned a little something. Are we any clearer on that?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, got a definition now. Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
There we go. Try and drop it into conversation today.
Yeah.
It's been a brilliant episode. Azahara, thank you so much for your time. I think we've all, got so much from it. And, perhaps you might come back again on the pod.
I would love to. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much.
Amazing.
That's it from us for this week. We will be back next Friday. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Before we go, it's time for a quick shameless plug. This episode was brought to you by Indulge, a digital agency built on thinking for the global financial services sector. If you're looking for an agency that can specialise in UX and design, production and marketing, then look no further. To find out more, visit indulge.digital. Thanks for listening.